think that's maybe no. Maybe we need internet.
It won't go.
We stopped at this lecture.
Yeah.
Could you refresh where?
After that, somewhere here.
Here.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. We need still internet, I think. I don't know what happened.
Yeah, sometimes
Yeah.
it happens.
Do you know what I need to write here?
From your ISU number and the password from not from ISU but from Wi-Fi that
I'm
is
not
in
remember
ISU.
Oh,
I
How
think
it
I
worked
can
yesterday?
find it. It sometimes happens.
sometimes
we don't know
sometimes
why.
it connected automatically, but sometimes it's lose
Yeah.
connection.
I can, for example, open my ISU and
Yeah.
my password.
Give your password.
Yeah.
У вас так не работает, кстати.
М?
Не получилось так написать.
Почему?
Я не знаю. Пробовали на еще один ноутбук расширить. Да, он ошибку выдал.
I will try to call them.
Yeah.
I need to pop up the balance.
Write my ISU number
Let's
and
try
my ISU
your
password here.
yeah.
Not
Not
here, it won't work.
Okay, let's try.
251.
251.
236.
236.
377.
77755. Okay, thank you.
I hope it will work.
But yesterday it was okay. I don't know how it's.
Sometimes computers in our...
Oh,
Is
it
Yeah.
works.
Oh, great. Okay, should be. I don't know. Refresh. Okay. Should be good now. Yeah. Let me just download. It's because my PowerPoint and this laptop is broken. I not have time to fix it right now, and that's why. But at least this lecture is English, but the next one is sorry again in Russia.
Okay.
But maybe it's good to you because I'm not imagine how much how much tasks do I need to give you, but at least working with text, with translation, optimization, it I think also will be useful. Okay, going back to this slide, do you remember what we're talking about here?
Yeah.
What is switching, mode logging? Maybe you can refresh and talk. Just like repeating.
Yeah, in the beginning we discussed code switching, so different ways to modulate our radiation with different ways. For example, with mechanical ways, with some magnetic effects, with electro-optic effects, which can change polarization of light and so transmit or not transmit our polarization due to the parameters of our radiation. So we can select our radiation in our resonators.
Select, maybe it's like not select, it's like modulation in time.
Yeah, modulate. Yeah, modulate.
Yeah?
Modulate,
Because
yeah.
it's the main things it's here that you have population inversion and you accumulate it, and in some period of time you open the shutter and obtain the increasing and then decreasing photon flux. Yeah. So in some period of time the resonator is empty. Yeah. So but in another time, so the power of radiation is modulated. That's why it's main switching. Okay. Electro-optic shuttles, I think we also consider it, yes, two polarizers and applied voltage. And the same for Faraday effect, I think we also start to speaking about it.
Yeah, we ended in the picture with the modes on this mode locking.
We consider it.
Yeah.
We consider it that the mode locking is maybe substantiated, or we can give a rationale for it as a sum of geometric progression, and discussing the number of modes higher the less we have duration of our pulse train, and the bigger, the higher secondary maximum here located, so it's directly related with number of modes, and the number of modes is also defined by this overlapping contour, which is directly is the spectral, the luminescence curve like this, how to say it. So it's like area where the active media working is able to irradiate to produce spontaneous emission. Okay, so we should consider how to do it physically. So this is a main principle, yeah, but we didn't discuss yet how to implement it. And now you can see two general approach. It's active mode locking and passive mode locking. So it's follow from the title. Active is when we do something like active воздействие. Action on the media. Yeah, passive is when the media doing is themselves itself. Without external voltage or so on. So it's like due to intrinsic, physical phenomena.
What does it mean? Inner.
Я бы не слышала просто.
Говорят.
Да, ну значит, да нет, я про то, что есть слова, которых я не знаю, это нормально.
So we can speak in Russian if necessary, if you not understand. So sometimes I also forgot sometimes. Okay, so we have two types of active mode locking. In fact, I think it's possible to find more of them. But if you compare electro-optical modulators, it will be approximately the same that we just seen in previous slide for switching. Yes, electro-optical crystal polarizers. So. And there is another possibility, for example, with acousto-optical modulator. The principle is that we have frequency synthesizer. It's like some generator which after amplifier signal directed on the piezo transducer. What you can see in Russian is замечательно. Okay, and here the prism to spread over the various angles the various frequencies, and we have this. We send the signal to here, and he produce like diffraction grating. Yeah, because of sound. Produce with diffraction grating in a lattice of this piezo transducer, and and we have active media. For example, it's a gas active media here shown, and we have some transducer resonance. We obtain some frequency. You can see the mode spacing is like equal to sound velocity and to substrate thickness, so it's like some condition how we can obtain select the frequencies, and so it's kind of active mode blocking approach, and if you can compare it with passive mode blocking, here we can see that there are no external voltage, no additional devices like electro-optical crystal or acousto-optical modulator, but here we have the media which is called saturable absorber. So how it's work? You can see the main principle is shown on this image. We have a pulse envelope, yeah, in time, and its intensity, and after passing the saturable absorber, the leading edge is spent to make them transparent. So it's at the first moment he is able to absorb the radiation, but after some portion of energy it became transparent, and that's why we lose this part of our pulse envelope, so it's how to say, absorbed, yes, and after that of course we lose the signal, lose energy of our pulse, so we need to use amplifier again. We amplify the signal in already that without these parts, and after the amplification we obtain a signal at least comparable with previous intensity, but maybe higher because it's like a kind of resonator, so it's active media. It's could be it could produce some energy, some less radiation. Okay, so I think the principle is clear. It's the main requirement that this absorber should be working very fast in fast time scale, like picosecond or femtosecond maybe. So this is a main requirement, but there are a lot of nonlinear processes which fit this requirement. And this is a comparison of two mode locking types. The first one is active mode locking. You can see that we applied external sound воздействие, I don't know, perturbation or so on, or electromagnetic field. So it's usually like sinusoidal type, and there is positions in time where this when we open the shutters, yeah, and in this time period we obtain something like it's like Q-switching. We have create the possibilities to transfer the radiation, and we obtain gain only here. So the resonator is not empty, but we obtain here the increasing gain, saturated gain only in this position. But in passive mode locking, we usually have it's like exponential decreasing, like most of relaxation processes. First of all, we have very high absorption, how to say, decreasing of this curve, and after that it's a kind of relaxation of this absorption. It's usually exponential. That's why it's able to provide a shorter pulses. So if we're going to the back to the beginning of our lecture, we will find that, I don't know, we can do that, I think, maybe, that the first lasers with mode locking was, here. The first lasers was passive mode locking, active mode locking, sorry, and the duration was nanosecond, picosecond, and when we applied passive mode locking, we decreased duration from 40 picosecond for 5 picosecond already. You can see the examples of saturable absorber was the rhodamine 6G Yes, and it was like liquid with jet, and it's because it's their molecules should be replaced, so it's maybe not very fast relaxation time. So that's why we need to exchange the molecules from pulse to pulse. That's why we need to put our radiation through the jet. It's of course not convenient, and after that you can see that the more shorter duration appeared when we used argon laser. So argon laser pumping, I think it's higher, produce more better wavelengths and better matching with these media transitions to create photons in laser. So okay, after that you can see here we start using going to use vibronic crystal like titan sapphire and already start to work with dispersion.
What does mean vibronic crystal?
Vibronic crystals, titan sapphire, it's crystals special types which produce some oscillation. It's we will have maybe the fourth lecture is about this media. We will consider 3 generations of lasers. It's the first one is rhodamine laser, the next one is vibronic crystal, and the next one is fiber laser. So by basics how it works. It's like 3 generations of femtosecond lasers. Or maybe the first one rather picosecond, but maybe sometime if you apply for example this rhodamine due laser with some grating compensation, maybe you will be able to obtain also some short duration like maybe 65 femtoseconds and so on. Okay, so going back to our consideration, it's be here, yeah. Oh no, I pressed like important point of shift F5, but it's not working. It's like that. Okay, so now the main questions, because it's very similar, what is the difference between active and passive mode locking? And the maybe more difficult question, what is the difference between code switching and active mode locking? Because in both setups we use, for example, shutters here. What is the difference?
Don't know yet.
It's very important questions because from our experience, my colleague go to the Professor Zarsakis in laboratory works, and the Professor Zarsakis when interviewed some PhD or maybe postdocs for his to work in his lab, he asking this question. So it's a question very important, and we also discuss it. So to try to guess maybe something. I especially highlight some things, but of course I not focus your attention directly, but I spoke the difference.
On the second question or the first one?
Let's start from the simplest one. What's the difference between passive and active mode?
So active when we use something external power, electricity or some acoustic gain, and passive when we do not use some external powers, when we use only our system resources to modulate our pulses. I don't know.
Yes. Okay. And what about the second one? What is the difference between code switching?
Maybe between code switching and mode locking. And active mode locking, maybe when we talk about mode locking, we are talking about collecting modes. So there is a space where we collect our modes, but with some frequency we open some shutters and let our radiation go out. And as for code switching, it is just used for changing the power, but not in case of collecting modes, maybe.
I think you're right. Maybe it's not so clear. Or do you understand this answer? Maybe ask
Not
something.
really.
Let's try to make short discussion.
I would try to add some information. I think that the main difference between co-switching and active mode locking is that co-switching, during co-switching process, we interact with the laser resonator, as I understand. Yep. And in active mode locking, we can use, we can interact not necessarily with the resonator. Maybe we can use something else, like another resonator. I mean, the difference is that in co-switching we interact with directly laser resonator that generates our laser radiation.
Yeah, I think you add maybe some details. So yes, the main difference is in co-switching there is a period of time when the resonator is empty. Yeah, it's so you in some period of time you increase the nonlinear, how to say, inverse population population inversion. Yeah, but that means that in some period of time you have radiation inside the resonator, and when you close the shutter, it's there are no radiation. It's only an accumulated inversion, population inversion. Yeah, but in co-switching, in mode locking, we have a lot of longitudinal modes. So it's like wavelengths, and they pass through the resonator in various positions. They could be generated in various period of time, but after that we create such conditions that such modes became matched in phase. So these longitudinal modes presents in the resonator. They could be maybe not so easily distinguishable or measured because they, due to their phase instability, or maybe phase because of absence of phase matching, they interfere destructively often. Yeah, so sometimes we have radiation in one wavelength, and in the next maybe femtosecond we have radiation in another wavelength. So it's not matching. But we try to create conditions by using the same examples to when these modes passes only in some specific period of time and through the our shutters, like not shutters, it's like this device. No, I think maybe it's possible to say shutter. This electro-optical modulator or acoustic-optical modulator. In this special condition, we provide due to these special devices, we provide favorable conditions for creating positive interference of modes which will be in phase. So it's we open only in this period of time we obtain favorable condition for positive interference. So there is a difference, and there are additional types of very often used types of passive mode locking is scare lens. It's used in our femtosecond titan sapphire systems. It's like, do you know about Kerr effect? I think so. When we, it's like a self-focusing of radiation, so optical Kerr effect. Yeah, because there is electro-optical Kerr effect. When you apply voltage, it also will be self-focusing of the focus. Not self-focusing, but it will be focusing due to the changing of linear properties of the media because of applied voltage. But now we're speaking about focusing of our radiation because of high power, and we have a media with Kerr nonlinearity, and we have a diaphragm. And the working principle is that we have a Gaussian distribution of energy, and in the center we have a lot of energy. That means that self-focusing in the center, we change the refractive index of our media more seriously by this nonlinear optical Kerr effect, yes. And at the edges we not do it. So without there is various modes which we are not in phase. They specially distributed over the Gaussian beam, and the Kerr lensing provides in the center we obtain a higher power. This means this effect higher, and only this radiation passes through this Kerr lens. Yes, and that means that we create favorable conditions to positive interference of this mode, which will be in phase in the center. But the other modes in the edges it's not passed because we use a diaphragm. It's not passing this radiation. So only focused radiation, self-focused radiation, could pass through this Kerr lens, and that means we provide the condition for switching. For mode blocking, sorry.
I have a question.
Yeah.
In general, Gaussian beams contain a lot of modes, not only one. Yeah. You said that there are plenty of modes.
I think I'm not so detailed consider it. I could answer. I don't know. Maybe the specialists in laser physics give you best answer. What I can try to answer based on my understandings. There is, for example, do you know about polynomials? So, for example, Laguerre-Gaussian or Hermite-Gaussian. So these polynomials describe the distribution is like a transverse electromagnetic modes and how it's appeared. So I believe that Gaussian beam is like zero polynomial, so it's not necessary should contain our other modes. But usually the impact of this zero modes the most serious, so it's most intensive. Sometimes it could be in other modes, and usually, for example, I know about some experiments when you able to, for example, if you have fiber and it's support passage of various type of transverse electromagnetic modes, that means that the basic modes going more straight, and another modes could be going with more reflection, then higher mode number, then higher number of reflection inside the fiber. That means during the propagation over fiber, your laser radiation will be also like dispersed in time. Yeah, so one mode will be going faster, the highest mode will be come later. And if you use, for example, time-resolved interference setup, you will have reference beam and shift the delay line. You will be able to find the interference only specific mode, and you will be able to separate all of them.
Okay, I get
so it's like that's why I think that's not. I see you ask it, but sometimes yes, sometimes researchers speak that it looks like Gaussian, the beam quality. It looks like Gaussian, but in fact it contains a lot of modes, and they not
there are a lot of coefficients of.
And what is else important? It's necessary to try to understand how to the highest mode obtain it. It's if you consider there is a book. It's after the optics of lasers. Yeah, and there is a chapter inside this book, the theory of Fox and Lee. It's two researchers who propose how to obtain this distribution of radiation, and like the polynomial description. So how it's working? It's you have two resonator. You have for example, you take initial some distribution of your field, and then you propagate in the first mirror and apply border conditions. So the field here in the center, for example, if you have square mirror, you apply that the field outside this mirror is should be disappears, tends to zero, and only field in the center will be able to interfere. And after that, you propagate this radiation to another mirror. During this propagation, you will have diffraction on this square aperture. It looks like square aperture. you propagate it here, of course you add some gains not to lose your signal, and here the processes repeat. And that means that you have some distances between your mirrors, you propagate your radiation forth and back a lot of time, and finally there is special conditions to appear only some diffraction modes. If you see that Laguerre-Gaussian modes, it's very similar Hermite-Gaussian, for example, like to diffraction pattern on the square aperture. So it's like a bit more, I don't know what's the difference exactly, it's necessary maybe to compare, but it could be said that diffraction on the square mirror, it looks like its first approximation. And after repeating of at the same distance, you repeat multiple times because radiation going multiple times over these two mirrors. You obtain finally or Hermite-Gaussian for square aperture or Laguerre-Gaussian for circle mirrors. Or that's why, and if you will consider how they interfere, how your wavefronts interfere inside this, you will see that there is some, for example, you have squared mirrors, you have straight edge of the mirror, and our radiation start to interfere, edge wave start to interfere in phase with and in out of phase with another edge wave from another side, and that means that exactly this, because of this, you obtain this minima and maxima because you have waves, edge waves which will be in phase and out of phase with the others. Yeah, that's why you obtain such symmetry. It depends on the kinds of construction of resonator, what I could say. Okay, maybe more questions. Then go. So you understood the difference between Q-switching and mode locking. It's very important. And now we consider the main two phenomena, how we obtain ultra short direction. But now let's consider how to obtain a shorter pulses. When you already obtained, for example, picosecond radiation or hundreds of femtoseconds, it still be not optimized because of dispersion, because we have active media which is have usually some dispersion inside it, yes, and you can see, as shown on this slide, any optical media produce transforms such Fourier limited pulse to this dispersed in time. When the red components going first, for example, the blue component going back. So what we can do, and I just send you a message from laboratory of Anton Sipkin that there is announcement tomorrow will be lecture of Donna Strickland. It's exactly Nobel Prize winner who proposed these techniques for pulse stretching and compression. It will be a full lecture about that. If you're interested, you can listen. I think it's, if you're planning to work in science in future, it's usually very useful to listen the most successful researcher what they told. Okay, and now we have, for example, a phase, yes, and we can consider in such Taylor expansion. You can see that there is absolute phase, there is a first derivative, it's like group delay, and group delay dispersion is the second derivative of this in this expansion equation. And you can see that when this term is more than zero, it's positive dispersion. When you have less than zero, this term, it's negative dispersion. That's defined who will be in the first and the edge of this passage of this radiation. Okay, and there is a prism. So the most simple thing how to stretch our radiation could be or grating or using prism. And let's consider how it works. We spread our radiation various components at the various angles. And if you consider here, in this place, the red components going short path, and the blue components going came through the longest path. You can see there is some delta between this, like this, pace difference.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and that means that after this propagation, some radiation change. Some pulses will be going faster, and another pulses going
Slower.
slower. Yeah, and there is more additional details about these schemes because except of this simple shift of various spectral components, there are a lot of there is such terms which is called spatial temporal couplings. It's the feature that when you perform Fourier transform, yes, of your pulse, you will able to, for example, there is because of frequency in time interconnected by Fourier transform, yeah. That means that any changes in temporal domain will be appeared in the spectral domain as well. And the others the other Fourier transform could be between spatial coordinates and angular coordinates. You know what is angular spectrum? It's when you take your Fourier transform from your spatial distribution. It's like you have your mode energy of distribution inside your laser mode, and you can, for example, pass it through the Fourier through the lens and obtain in the focal field, in focal plane of your lens, you obtain Fourier distribution of your initial pulse.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it's like optically, but mathematically in your math package you can just use FFT and obtain Fourier image of your initial pulse, and that means you're going from real coordinates to angular coordinates, because according to the model of angular spectrum, each it's like frequencies, but it's not frequencies like in time, but it's frequencies of image. So you have image, or because of the signal theory it's the same, or your transverse energy distribution inside your beam. Yeah, you have you can describe like sinusoidal wave inside your for example, Hermite-Gaussian mode and Laguerre-Gaussian mode could be described by Fourier components, and each Fourier components propagates in various angles.
Mm-hmm.
So higher frequency going in the highest angles, the lower frequency going in the lower angles. That means that after diffraction and some aperture, you from here you obtain as far you measure your intensity distribution, you will obtain only lowest modes. That's why, for example, in an imaging system, you need to put your object, if you measure diffraction field and would like to recreate the image of the object from this diffraction pattern, it's better to put your object closer to the measurement plane, because spatial frequency not disappeared, not going at the widest angles, and you're able to catch it without limited field of view. Okay, so there are two terms, like two maybe domain, finally 4 domains. Yeah, you have spatial coordinates, angular coordinates, time and frequency, which describes our pulses. And our pulses usually it's complex valued. At least we have amplitude and phase.
Mm-hmm.
We also can add polarization, but it's not important here for this consideration. It's important that we can amplitude and phase. So in fact, if you write the table, you will have 4 various coordinates system here, and for amplitude and phase we will obtain 8 special couplings types. So if we change something in one coordinates, yeah, for amplitude and for phase, it will be reflected automatically in another coordinates. So, for example, if you put your prism in various positions like that, you can introduce some additional couplings effects. It will be, for example, after pacing, you have a wavefront, yeah, and your wavefront going through the, for example, diffraction grating, maybe next slide or where, yeah, like that. You have wavefront, and it's after the diffraction grating. Let's consider for the simplest case a transmitting diffraction grating. Your wavefront looks like that. It's approaching to the diffraction grating, and after that it splits on the, for example, 3 diffraction orders. One going forward, and what happens? how the forms of wavefronts will be, which is propagated in this direction. Could you imagine? You have wavefront, and how it will be propagated in this direction? Like that, or like that?
I think he will rotate as well. The wave vector also will rotate. No, I mean.
No. How you explain it physically? You have a diffraction with a number of slits.
And then go. So you have
The direction of
then
propagation
you
will
have
be
off.
there. Yeah. That means that your pulse will be tilted. It's easily imagine on the diffractive grating, because you have you have only slits and you don't have any dispersion elements. You don't need to remember dispersion curve for this material and so on. So for diffraction, it's easier. Diffraction grating is easier to imagine this process. But it will be the same for prisms. You will also have some changing of your wavefront. That means you would have some interaction, or not interaction, some you introduce some chirp in angular coordinates. It's not only frequency chirp, it's some changing of your angular coordinates, so you propagate your wavefront in this direction. There is special paper on this topic, special questions could be considered deeper, but I think my idea only delivered to you this information that you need to take into account a lot of parameters when you're working with that. And that means to compensate such complex couplings, special temporal complex effects, the simplest ways is maybe use something like that. You have two prisms. Here you have at least three couplings effects after passing such three prisms, and you compensate it when your light passes in the same prisms in the same direction. You will compensate such aberration. Maybe we can use this word. We can compensate these complex effects, or we can alternatively we can put mirror here, and our pulses will go in the back direction. But if we will use another, for example, here we use prisms, and here we will use gratings, we obtained a pulse which will be not the same as initial in some terms because of angular coordinates. So working with femtosecond pulses is very difficult because you need to see what happens in various domains with amplitude and with phase. You need to consider 8 domains or maybe 8 parameters, and maybe it could be similar like in temporal distribution if you will use two prisms, two diffraction grating here, but because of not this mismatching of here we have some dispersion curve, here we have linear in grating, in grating you have like linear dispersion, and it will be not matching. You obtain some special distribution which will be not the same as initial beam. But for some reason maybe it will be useful. For example, if you're able to manage and obtain specific form of your pulses, you can use various optical elements and take into account, you use this theory. So it's in good and back as well. It depends on your task. And researcher only now, for example, start to actively use angular coordinates, and now a lot of paper in scientific in Nature Photonics and so on, how they produce various kind of beams. For example, vortex beams is beams with spiral phase, which is propagated in this direction. But for example, if you consider kx, ky, and kz, so 3 distribution of angular vector, yes, you can obtain beam which will be rather closer, not optical vortex beams, but it will be closer like cyclone, like which propagate in this direction and rotate like that.
It's like transversal
Transfer, it's So it's their direction and angular momentum is transfers to their propagation direction. If it's became clear from the analysis of these angular coordinates how it's worked, so it's very important things, and this now it's not everything studied here. So because a lot of parameters, because of a lot of kind of beams and so on. It's just what you can consider. Okay, I think you know stretcher compressor. Maybe you already did the laboratory works about that. No,
not yet.
Okay, so you will did this laboratory works, and kind simple. The equations is given in the laboratory practice study guide, and the idea was. That you put your prisms to find optimal, to adjust the distance between two prisms, taking to some parameters of the prism like dispersion curve, to match, obtain as shorter pulses as you can, or maybe again stretch the pulse in the first. And finally, did you understand why it's necessary to stretch pulse and then compress? Why it's important? Why it will be awarded by Nobel Prize? This simple thing.
To match the phases, match the group velocities of pulse. I mean, to avoid dispersion.
It's for stretching, but why you for compression? But why you need stretch the pulse?
Because very short pulses are characterized by very high energy. So when we put this high energy into material can explode. Yeah.
It's because of limited optical, how to say, there is a specific term, лучевая стойкость,
durability,
radiation resistance, maybe something like this. So there is limited radiation resistance, and that means that if you deliver a lot of energy in a short period of time, the material could be damaged or something else. But if you spread your pulse over various time, like shown here, red and blue will be separated. So at the first moment you will able to gain the first component, at the next moment of time you will able to gain the other component.
When we use, for example, stretcher or compressor, do we change the spectrum of our pulse? Because we know that if we have our femtosecond pulse, it's characterized by very wide spectrum. But when we compress or make it even shorter, what happens with the spectrum?
When you're speaking about Fourier limited pulse, it's спектральное ограничение in Russian. Yeah? Fourier transformed limited or something like that it's called. And you consider only the radiation which is already maximally all components in phase, so without chill. Yeah, well, when you spread your pulses, the components is not disappeared from the pulse, yes, but you unable to describe to use this equation to obtain. So the spec, it's another term, maybe wave band limited, but I think the most correct use for Fourier transform limited pulse is when you use these pulses. That means you when you apply this equation, you consider that you have no chill, so all components in phase. When you extend these pulses or stretch it, I think you can describe the spectrum in what period of time. Yeah, you can say in this instant moment we have one component, so the spectrum will be different. But if you will consider the whole spectrum, I think it should not be changed, because when is the simplest case, when you consider interference of two wave trains, what happens? In some cases, if you try to calculate with a bullet and so on, when you your trains even just approaching one to each other, but in spectrum you already obtain some interference. Yeah, it's a little strange, but that means that here we have also some components, yeah, some waves, but outside this envelope they are not in phase. But when you add additional pulses, these components which previously was not in phase, they became be in phase. So I think for I don't know, we have a quite interesting discussion about will the spectra change it or not. I think it should not be changed. It looks strange, but sometimes some students obtain some results, it's changed. But if we will consider the spectrum expansion of our components, you try to explain the behavior of your pulses like sum of coherent components of wave with various frequencies or various wavelengths. So in this case, if you try to explain like that, it will be much clearer. So the spectrum just could be interfere positively or interfere negatively. But in fact, all components exist inside. And that means that approaching conditional pulses only just able to
like review.
Review that these components exist. But in fact, they able to interfere only in short limited period of time, because if you have higher the bandwidth, we obtain the shorter, as we already discussed, mode locking. So it's again we're speaking about mode locking, but now it's not only mode locking, but it's interference of longitudinal modes. If you add some energy outside, there could be some interesting phenomena.
Okay.
I think I answered your questions, but if you rephrase it a little bit, it could be a long discussion. Because it's really a lot of small details which you need to take into account, because one case when chirp is 0, another case when we positively chirp it, and there is a phase, dependence phase from the frequency. It could be linear, it could be quadratic, it could be third order and so on, in arbitrary. Yeah, you can use shaper. We're just going to the next slide, maybe here, pulse shaping. You will see that it's possible to add any dispersion curve to your pulse. Let's go to these questions. But first, we need to consider chirped mirrors. Do you know what is it? Are you able to explain this image? I think it's quite straightforward from this.
This mirror allows us to separate our spectral components of the beam.
It's not rather not separate. It's like active and passive mode locking. This is a passive device which able to compress your laser radiation. Yeah. So, for example, as you can see, it's a lot of interference layers, and due to interference, for example, for this wavelengths, interference able to pass our. So this is a mirror substrate and a lot of thin layers on the east surface, and blue radiation, as shown here, reflected going not so deep inside these layers, but red one with bigger wavelengths is able to go to this diffraction grating. You can see that which is match with the wavelengths of this radiation. So a lot of various mirrors. That means if you such mirrors, as I understood, I never. It's necessary to consult with manufacturer of femtosecond lasers directly, but I think they consider that they have some resonators, some parameters, and they order specifically this grating for specific pulse distribution, or frequency distribution of their pulse. So it's not possible to use any mirrors like that. It will be not optimized. I think it should be optimized and match it with your bandwidth content of your pulse, something like that. Okay, and
why do we need chirped mirrors? To compress?
To compress.
To compress.
Yeah. because compress is much difficult than decompress. To decompress, you just use, for example, quartz or parallel plates. We have a lot of parallel plates here in our laboratories. It was whole room maybe 10 or 20 years ago, 50 years ago, I think. We have in the background, we have the whole room where the house of the room was filled such parallel plates. It's from State Optical University Institute, which is near here, you know. And we took a lot of them. You just put it to optical path of your beam, and because of dispersion in this material, you have a lot of them. You can push one to each other, and you're able to stretch your pulse at any
to any degree.
Yeah, any degree, something like that. So it's easier, but when you need to compress, it's much difficult. And how to do it? So the first solution is stretching and compression. The stretching is necessary to further amplifications of the pulses. After that, you compress it, and nevertheless, you will able to have some to obtain the best matching. Yeah, you need to compensate some phenomena, because you have, for example, mirror resonator. It could be introduced some also some chirp, something like that. And after that, you will have some. You create pulse shaping scheme. And well, by the way, I just mentioned that a vortex beam, which propagated like cyclone, is also produced with such pulse shaping, and a lot of kind of beams could be produced with such devices. But the problem is that this you have two physical dimensions. If we not consider the direction of propagation, you have x and y coordinates, and here, as you can see, you change one spatial coordinates to one frequency coordinates because of diffraction grating. Раскладывает your pulse, dispersed, yeah, I think, dispersed your pulse over the various angles, yeah, and that means in vertical coordinates you have still spatial coordinates, but in transverse coordinates you will have, I maybe show like that, yeah, you have diffraction gratings is side view and top view. In side view you have how to explain what's shown here. From one coordinate, diffraction grating, your pass your radiation over various angles. From the maybe it's easier to explain here. Yeah, there is a grating, so it's dispersed in this coordinate. But if you will see from the side view, you will not see that the same spatial coordinates. The pulses will be the same. So these mirrors usually not spherical mirrors. This is a cylindrical mirrors. Yeah, and there are two types. For example, you can use lenses, but of course lenses also add some dispersion. And you can use reflection parabolic mirrors or cylindrical mirrors. In one coordinate it will be like cylindrical shape, yeah, so the sphericity will be the same for the same heights. But in this coordinate it will be described like parabolic equation. And this is of course the best solution for the femtosecond optics, because it's not introduce any dispersion, only all of the waves only reflects. It's not introduce the dispersion inside the material like lenses. So usually you can use achromatic lenses, of course, but it's not so bad, not so good as reflection parabolic mirror. But it's quite more challenging to work with parabolic mirrors when you're adjusting your optical system. So a lot of aberration, it's quite not convenient to focus the lenses, much simpler, but if you need to use the final very good results, you need to use parabolic mirrors. And let's consider what happens there. We have we show here red and blue pulses, blue components of our pulse. Yeah, it's going to the various direction, and you can see there is a Fourier plane where we will able to introduce any shift for one pulses and another one. For example, if you put wedge, yeah, here to we will retard the red components, and the blue components will be going faster through the Fourier plane. Yeah, and it's here that symmetrical wedge introduce linear phase shift. So each spectral components will be retarded linearly, yeah, because of wedge is linear position. But if we will use lens, for example, negative divergent lens creates quadratic positive chirp. So these components will be delayed the same as that, but in the central components will be obtain the lesser retardation. Yeah. In here, convergent lens is opposite to divergent lens. We will obtain quadratic negative chirp and pulse affected anomalous dispersion. In this case, we will obtain normal dispersion. Okay, so it's clear. It's a similar, simple case, but maybe it's necessary. Of course, it's also wedge in parabolic divergent and convergent lens should be only in one coordinate. If you will use another lens, you will have in special position, you will how to say, you will lose your matching with this, for example, red components which in the top of your beam, in the highest one, I think this is a side we will see from the top, yeah, and if you consider the part of the radiation which is closer to us from our observation, will be much more also diverged with the same spectral components which go in the central component, in the center of the beam, yeah, in this coordinate, vertical coordinate. That means that we need to use cylindrical parabolic convergent lens or divergent lens. It should be cylindrical. Okay, this is also, so this is a case for the pulse shaper for the parabolic mirrors, and another things you can use here not only optical elements, static optical elements. You could put special light modulator to here. Everyone know what is it? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when you tunable adjust the like in liquid crystals, you will tunable adjust the propagation of each spectral components from computer. So we just put image to here, and you will able to, if you have, there are two types of spatial modulator. It could be amplitude modulator or phase modulator, but there are approaches to obtain, to convert, for example, binary amplitude modulation to independent amplitude and phase modulation. We do it in our lab, and so it's possible to control both parameters, both amplitude and phase. The setup will be not so simple like that, but it's possible to do.
What does binary mean?
Binary, that means it's like a digital micromirror device. You have on and off position, you have radiation in this diffraction order, or you don't have. So in each special position, each mirror define you that you have radiation or not. That's, and after that you can convert it to amplitude and phase modulation, independent. So in one plane, only in one plane, you will be able to obtain, for example, you can draw one image in phase and another image in amplitude, and this image will be approximately not interacted one to each other. But if you produce some, will be measure your intensity distribution or phase distribution in another position because of some connection with amplitude and phase, like Gilbert transform and so on, you will be able to observe imprint of amplitude on the phase distribution and imprint the phase on the amplitude distribution. So there is some connection between them, but in one plane you will be able to obtain independent one amplitude and one phase. But here maybe a bit simpler case. For example, you have phase special light modulator which able to retard the phase in each positions, yeah, and you will use you can use, for example, knife edge or some amplitude. You can use some piece of not transparent paper for this radiation, yeah, and you can how to say, cut some slits in your piece of paper, and you can shift it, or maybe you can use various kind of knives, yeah, like blades, yeah, blade, yeah, some blades, and you can block some spectral components and manage your amplitude contents of your pulse. You can, for example, obtain a lot of slits here, and you will you obtain something like frequency comp, but it will work not with frequency comp, I think, but some spectral contents will be already not described by a continuous envelope, so it will be like rather like that. Okay, and here the examples. DM is deformable mirror, so you can use add some, not only there are a lot of, not so lot, but there are liquid crystal special light modulators, there are digital micromirror devices, and there are deformable mirrors. And maybe, of course, there are various types of amplitude and phase liquid crystals, because various types of liquid crystals and so on. But deformable mirrors you usually use for adaptive optics. They have not so many pixels, but they use, because adaptive optics, you can see a lot of small move very fast. You need to correct your signal very fast. So deformable mirrors is rather faster than DMDs. Use very high voltage, maybe 100 or 1,000 hundreds of kilovolts, but they use control the phase only in small actuator positions. So usually it's limited numbers. If you have, for example, the easily available special light modulator have pixels like your camera, yeah, 1,000 to 1,000 or higher, but deformable mirror usually have 64 actuators, so it's control of the phase not in so high frequency. Yeah, so it's rather for smooth wavefront, but very fast to work with very unstable conditions, dynamic conditions. Okay, so the conclusion to switching and non-blocking to obtain short powerful light pulses, special devices used. I think it could be rephrased. It's not the main idea. So the main idea that resonator is empty here, yeah, and we have accumulation inversion and population inversion, and mode locking is we create a favorable condition for interference of longitudinal modes, and it could be done if we create condition for interference in time or interference in space. For example, Kerr lens is interference in space, yeah, in time when you use some like shutters, electro-optical and so on. So we produce favorable condition for interference in time. Okay, so pulse compression and stretching is very important. It's awarded by Nobel Prize because previously it was limited. The researcher not able to produce high power laser systems. So, for example, if you consider National Ignition Facility, what we consider for thermonuclear synthesis, yes, they use 192 lasers with amplifiers, but if it will be not possible to amplify, stretch and compress pulses, they will use maybe 1,000 and more. These lasers, and it's much difficult task, absolutely, I think, much more expensive and so on. So this is one example, but of course there are a lot of them. I think that it's not possible to laser surgery without amplifier, but I don't know exactly. Maybe it's possible enough to cut. But at least some application of femtosecond lasers still not possible without such amplification. So stretcher compressor is clear, and pulse shaper able to control our pulse not only in temporal domain but also in spatial domain too. If we will consider like angular coordinates, we can modify this scheme to add, for example, some lenses inside here. This is, you can see without lenses, this scheme with lenses. So here we're working in Fourier space, here we're working in KX space, I think. So a bit different results could be obtained here. And that's all for this lecture. Maybe some questions.
How we determine that you just said we're now working in KX dimension?
Окей,
Можно даже по-русски, наверное.
Давайте.
Сложный что-то момент какой-то.
Сейчас, давайте
я
я...
не понял, как вы что-то говорили по поводу того, что у нас одна координата заменяется там, одна пространственная заменяется на спектральную координату. Там, что-то в этом духе было.
Вот я тут обзор рецензировал, сейчас я посмотрю по нему, наверное. Только, наверное, сразу быстро не начать. Сейчас попробую. Тут всякие шейперы и вот такие пучки, как раз про которые я говорил. Вот схема, которая точно использует угловые координаты. Просто, может, я там не совсем правильно про ту схему сказал. Вот, например, СЛМ, цилиндрическая линза, и, ну, то есть с линзой все-таки. Так, сейчас. То есть, по сути, это вот такой же шейпер, как и там. У нас есть, значит, линза, решетка, линза, еще одна. И мы вот входной пучок на SLM задаем в вихрь, но пропуская через две цилиндрические линзы, причем одна так, другая так. Мы его вот разворачиваем, и он летит вот в эту сторону, и вот так крутится.
Но это фазово имеется в виду.
Но мы в фазу его задаем, но потом мы преобразуем двумя цилиндрическими линзами его в угловых координатах распределение, что он вот
имеет бублик такой.
Да. На самом деле надо показать еще какого-нибудь Абаредди. Я сейчас попробую вспомнить. Наверное, вот здесь вниз. Да, вот есть обзор такой. Сейчас. Такая короткая статья с коротким названием, которую надо было с 4 слов. Так. Нет, почему я не вижу? 4. Вот эти вот. Пространственно-временные волновые пакеты. Вот это исчерпывающий обзор про эти все вещи. И, ну, давайте по картинкам просто пройдемся. Я не помню, где там что. Вот такие графики основные. То есть, вот так вот. У нас есть KX, KY и KZ координаты. И у нас есть вот такой вот, ну, поскольку это со скоростью света летит, у нас получается такой конус, да, то есть луч по пространству Z, он, ну, зависит от скорости света, в каждый момент времени он распространяется, поэтому у нас всегда такой конус. Но мы можем задавать туда, ну, как говорится, вот, что там огибающая может быть выше скорости света, да, то есть мы можем управлять групповой дисперсией вот этих компонентов, и мы можем задавать вот разные распределения вот таких пучков. И если вот здесь дальше почитать, то вот, например, какие-то пучки, например, вот монохроматический пучок, у него KX, KY, да, у него вот такое распределение, то есть у него нету, ну, частота одна, вот эта вот ось, Y, омега С, это, ну, по сути, частота, поэтому монохроматический пучок мы режем вот этот конус, режем вот так, и вот у него проекция KX, KZ, у него вот такая, он обладает вот такой вот дисперсией, ну, в координатах KX, KZ, то есть вот оно, как здесь показано.
В пространстве волновых векторов.
Да, в пространстве волновых векторов. А если мы посмотрим вот какие-нибудь уже другие пучки, вот плоская волна, когда летит, ну, с разными частотами, да, то есть у нее, она плоская, у нее вот здесь такая просто линия идет, то есть KX у нее вот, ну, волновой вектор, он идет так. Вот. И вот здесь какие-то, ну, значит, еще графики, которые тоже, наверное, стоит посмотреть, они вроде омега нулевой, омега 1, то есть разные длины волн, как они суммируются, видимо, показаны. Здесь пока вроде различий нет. Вот. Но хотя там что-то серое, видимо, потому что это монохроматическое излучение было вот здесь, но серое. Вот. А здесь дальше вот он пошел, например, обычный, ну, гауссовый, вот, ну, обычный пучок. Вот у него такая штука, и у него все компоненты, они вообще, ну, в общем случае не оптимизированы. То есть он какой-то вот такой. Но мы их можем оптимизировать с помощью шейпера. И дальше, наверное, вот какие-то кривые, как мы ими там можем управлять. Можем получать всякие листы недифрагирующие. Вот произвольный какой-то пучок. То есть мы берем его как-то на SLM там задаем, и у него получается вот такая вот в KZ, и вот, ну, такие вот кривые. Вот. И дальше вот, например, там получение Ну, они получали листы такие, потому что одна координата у них была есть. Но хотя, по-моему, дальше там где-то схемы на 2D они перешли.
Листы света.
Да, ну то есть он потому что по одной координате на шейпере остается, они частотами управляют. То есть сначала они получили лист, но потом я говорю, там есть где-то внизу обзора, что они научились двойным. Вот, например, сублюминал, то есть есть суперлюминал, это который выше скорости света, есть сублюминал. И вот у него там либо эллипс, либо парабола, то есть сечение этого конуса, 3 кривые, да, выше гипербола, парабола или что, или гипербола, или эллипс, да. То есть вот различные сечения дают разные пучки, ну и дальше я, наверное, не буду вас терзать этим. Но вот разные сечения дают разные штуки, и получаются разные пучки. Вот. Поэтому это вот совсем свежее, видите, 22 год, и вообще, ну, это последние 5 лет все развивается. Что, перерывчик? Давайте 5, 10, 15.
У нас вообще 20 по расписанию.
Ну, давайте 20.
Я сегодня спросил.
Хорошо. Значит, тогда во сколько? 12:58, 13:20, да?